On the night of November 10th, 1975, the largest ship on the Great Lakes vanished. One moment, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was battling a ferocious storm on Lake Superior. The next, it was gone. There was no distress call, no explosion, no mayday. The ship and its 29 crew members simply disappeared from radar. The last message from its captain was calm, almost routine. "We are holding our own." Just minutes later, the 729-foot giant plunged to the bottom of the lake, taking every man with it. No bodies were ever recovered. No survivors lived to tell the tale. For nearly 50 years, the question has haunted maritime historians, engineers, and the families of the lost crew. What really sank the Edmund Fitzgerald? Was it a catastrophic structural failure? A rogue wave that came out of nowhere? Or was it something else, a fatal awe hidden in the ship's design, a mistake made in the chaos of the storm, a combination of factors that turned a routine voyage into a death sentence? The OSHL investigation was inconclusive. The theories are many, but new evidence and a closer look at the minal hours of the mighty Fitz reveals a truth more terrifying than anyone imagined. This is the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald, the ship that vanished without a trace. The Edmund Fitzgerald was more than just a ship. She was a legend. When she was launched on June 7, 1958, in River Rouge, Michigan, she was the largest vessel on the Great Lakes, a title she held for over a decade. At 729 feet long and weighing over 13,000 gross tons, she was a marvel of mid-century American engineering. Her hull was painted a distinctive red and white, and her name was emblazoned in bold letters on her bow. She was the pride of the American side, the Titanic of the Great Lakes. She was built by the Great Lakes Engineering Works for the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, an unusual venture for an insurance company, but one that paid handsomely. The ship cost $8.4 million to build, a staggering sum in 1958, but she would prove her worth many times over. For 17 years, the Fitzgerald was a workhorse, hauling taconite iron ore, a low-grade iron ore processed into pellets from the mines of the Minnesota Iron Range near Duluth to the steel mills of Detroit, Toledo, and other Great Lakes ports. She set seasonal haul records 6 times, often breaking her own previous records. She was fast, reliable, and beloved. Part of her fame came from her captains, particularly Captain Peter Pulser, who was known for piping music over the ship's intercom system day and night as they passed through the Street Clair and Detroit rivers. He would entertain spectators at the Sioux Locks, the series of locks that connect Lake Superior to Lake Huron, with a running commentary about the ship, her cargo, and her crew. The Fitzgerald became a celebrity, a goading icon of Great Lakes shipping. Boat watchers would gather to see her pass, and children would wave from the shore. She was more than steel and rivets. She was a symbol of American industrial might. But by November 1975, Captain Pulser had retired. The Fitzgerald was now under the command of Captain Ernest M. McSorley, a 60-year-old veteran of the lakes. McSorley was a different kind of captain, quiet, methodical, and deeply experienced. He had been sailing the Great Lakes for decades and knew their moods, their dangers, and their secrets. He was respected by his crew and his peers. He was the kind of captain you wanted at the helm when the weather turned bad. His crew of 28 men were a mix of seasoned sailors and young cadets, men who, like their captain, understood the power and the unpredictability of the inland seas. They were fathers, sons, and husbands. Men like First Mate Jack McCarthy, a 51-year-old family man from Bay Village, Ohio, who had spent 30 years on the lakes. Deckhand Mark Thomas, just 21 years old, on one of his Brest voyages, eager to prove himself. Watchman Carl Fees, 33, who left behind a wife and young children. Chief Engineer Joseph Simmons, 63, a man who had spent his entire adult life in the engine rooms of Great Lakes freighters, a man who knew every bolt and valve of the Fitzgerald's machinery. Porter Allen Coleman, just 20 years old, the youngest member of the crew. These were the human hearts of this steel giant, and on the afternoon of November 9th, 1975, they embarked on what should have been a routine end-of-season trip. The Fitzgerald was loaded with 26,116 long tons of taconite pellets, bound for the Zug Island steel mill near Detroit. It was late in the shipping season, the lakes would soon freeze over for the winter, and this was one of the last runs of the year. The weather forecast called for a storm, but nothing the Fitzgerald and her crew hadn't handled before. Or so they thought. The Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, just after 2:00 p.m. on November 9th, under partly cloudy skies. The barometer was dropping, a sign that a storm was on its way, but Captain McSorley wasn't overly concerned. He'd sailed through dozens of these late-season gales. He plotted a course along the northern shore of Lake Superior, hoping to use the Canadian Highlands as a natural windbreak against the worst of the storm. Another ship, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, was traveling with them, about 15 miles behind. The Anderson was also carrying taconite, and her captain, Jesse Bernie Cooper, was in regular radio contact with McSorley. The two ships were like companions on the vast, lonely expanse of Lake Superior, the largest and deepest of the Great Lakes. Lake Superior is not a gentle body of water. It is 350 miles long, 160 miles wide, and in some places over 1,300 feet deep. It contains 10% of the world's fresh surface water, and when it gets angry, it is terrifying. But as the evening wore on, the storm began to intensify. By midnight, the winds had picked up to 35 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 50. The waves, once gentle swells, were now growing into towering walls of water. By the morning of November 10th, the storm had become a full-blown gale, a classic Witch of November, a term sailors use for the violent, unpredictable storms that strike the Great Lakes in late autumn, when cold Arctic air collides with the warmer waters of the lakes. The National Weather Service issued a gale warning at 7:00 a.m. on November 10th, predicting winds of 35 to 50 miles per hour and waves of 8 to 15 feet. But the reality was far worse. By the afternoon, the winds were sustained at over 60 miles per hour, with gusts reaching near hurricane force. Some estimates put them at 70 to 80 miles per hour. The waves were not 15 feet. They were 25 feet. Some reports suggest they may have reached 35 feet, towering, violent mountains of water that crashed over the deck of the Fitzgerald with bone-shaking force. The Fitzgerald, despite her size, was being tossed around like a toy. The waves were so powerful that they were bending the ship's steel hull, causing it to X and groan. This is a phenomenon known as hogging and sagging, when the bow and stern are lifted by waves while the middle sags, or vice versa. Every ship experiences this to some degree, but in a storm like this, the stress on the hull was immense. Water was pouring over the deck, and the crew was struggling to keep up with the damage. Captain McSorley, ever the professional, kept his crew informed and his ship on course. But by early afternoon, it was clear that this was no ordinary storm. The Fitzgerald was taking a beating. At 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley made a radio call to Captain Cooper on the Anderson. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have sustained some topside damage. We have a fence rail down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list. The ship was tilting to one side. It was the Erst sign that something was terribly wrong." Captain Cooper asked if the Fitzgerald was taking on water. McSorley replied that his pumps were working, but he didn't elaborate. The two captains agreed to stay in close contact as they made their way toward the shelter of Whitish Bay, a protected harbor on the eastern shore of Lake Superior. But to get there, they had to cross a treacherous stretch of water near a place called 6 Fathom Shoal, an area known for its shallow, rocky bottom. It was a calculated risk, but McSorley believed he could make it. As the afternoon wore on, the situation aboard the Fitzgerald grew more dire. The storm was not letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The waves were now so large that they were obscuring the ship from view. Captain Cooper, watching from the Anderson, could barely see the Fitzgerald through the snow and spray. The two ships were now in a jight for survival. Then, another blow. At around 4:00 p.m., the Fitzgerald's radar went out. They were now eyeing blind in a blizzard, surrounded by towering waves and jagged rocks. The Anderson, still behind them, became their eyes. Captain Cooper guided McSorley through the storm via radio, calling out their position and warning them of obstacles. It was a nerve-wracking situation for both captains. One wrong turn, one miscalculation, and the Fitzgerald could run aground. But around 5:30 p.m., something happened that would haunt Captain Cooper for the rest of his life. The Anderson's radar showed that the Fitzgerald had sailed dangerously close to 6 Fathom Shoal. In fact, it appeared that the Fitzgerald may have passed directly over it, or at least come within a few hundred feet. Did they hit the bottom? Did the ship's hull scrape against the rocks, tearing open a gash below the waterline? Captain Cooper couldn't be sure. He radioed McSorley to ask if everything was okay. McSorley's response was brief: "We are holding our own." But was he? The Fitzgerald was now listing more heavily. The crew reported that the ship was down by the head, the bow was sitting lower in the water than the stern. The pumps were running at full capacity, trying to keep up with the water that was oozing into the ship. But where was the water coming from? Was it from the damaged vents on the deck? Was it from a crack in the hull? Or was it from the cargo hold, seeping in through loose or damaged hatch covers? The crew was exhausted, battered by the storm, and struggling to keep the ship afloat. But McSorley, ever the professional, kept his voice calm. He didn't want to alarm his crew or the Anderson. He believed he could make it to Whitish Bay. He was just 17 miles away. At the Fitzgerald's top speed of 16 miles per hour, that was just over an hour. He was so close. But the lake had other plans. At 7:00 p.m., Captain Cooper saw something on his radar that made his blood run cold. A massive wave, larger than any he had seen that day, was bearing down on the Fitzgerald. It was a Three Sisters, a phenomenon where 3 giant waves hit in rapid succession, each one larger than the last. The first wave crashes over the deck, adding weight. The second adds more. The third, striking before the ship can recover, is the nonal blow. Cooper had just experienced 2 such waves hitting the Anderson, and they had nearly swamped his own ship. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Cooper made one last radio call. "Fitzgerald, how are you making out with your problem?" Captain McSorley's voice came back, calm and steady. "We are holding our own." It was the last time anyone would ever hear from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Minutes after that Nal call, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar. One moment, the blip representing the 729-foot ship was there. The next, it was gone. There was no explosion, no reball, no distress call, no mayday, just nothing. Hold the silence for 3 to 4 seconds. Let it breathe. Captain Cooper stared at his screen in disbelief. He called out on the radio. "Fitzgerald? Fitzgerald, this is the Anderson. Do you read me?" Only static answered. He called again, and again. Nothing. The Fitzgerald, the largest ship on the Great Lakes, the pride of the American side, had vanished without a trace. Cooper's thought was that his radar had malfunctioned, but his equipment was working perfectly. The Fitzgerald was simply gone. For the next few hours, the Anderson searched, battling the same storm that had claimed the Fitzgerald. They crisscrossed the area, their searchlights cutting through the snow and darkness, hoping to net survivors, lifeboats, debris, anything. They found nothing. The lake had swallowed the ship whole. No life rafts, no bodies, no wreckage. It was as if the ship had never existed. The Coast Guard launched a massive search and rescue operation, deploying ships, helicopters, and aircraft. But it was too late. The storm was still raging, and visibility was near zero. The waves were still 20 feet high, and the wind was still howling. By the morning of November 11th, the grim reality had set in. The Edmund Fitzgerald and its 29 crew members were gone. 4 days later, on November 14th, a U.S. Navy aircraft, using advanced magnetic detection equipment, found the wreck. It was lying 530 feet beneath the surface of Lake Superior, just 17 miles from the safety of Whitish Bay. At top speed, the Fitzgerald could have covered that distance in just over an hour, but she never made it. A submersible was sent down to investigate. The images it sent back were haunting. The Edmund Fitzgerald was broken in two. The bow section sat upright in the mud, eerily intact, as if it had simply settled gently to the bottom. The pilot house was still recognizable, but the stern section told a different story. It was upside down, a mangled mess of twisted steel and shattered metal. The propeller, still attached, pointed up toward the surface. The two pieces were separated by a debris eld of taconite pellets, cargo hatch covers, and fragments of the ship's superstructure. The wreck told a story of violent, catastrophic failure. The ship had not simply sunk, it had been torn apart. But how and why? In 1995, on the 20th anniversary of the sinking, a dive team led by the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society recovered the ship's bell. It was a solemn, emotional moment. The bell, which had rung out over the lakes for 17 years, calling the crew to their duties, was brought to the surface. In its place, the divers left a replica bell, engraved with the names of the 29 men who were lost. The original bell now serves as the centerpiece of a memorial at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum in Whitish Point, Michigan, a tribute to the crew who went down with their ship. Every year, on November 10th, a ceremony is held at the museum. The bell is rung 29 times, once for each member of the crew. Their names are read aloud, families gather, tears are shed. The memory of the Edmund Fitzgerald lives on. So what really sank the Edmund Fitzgerald? For nearly 50 years, there have been three main theories, each supported by evidence, each challenged by doubt. Theory 1. The hatch covers. This was the official conclusion of the U.S. Coast Guard investigation. It suggests that the hatch covers, which sealed the cargo hold, were not properly secured or were damaged by the waves. As giant waves crashed over the deck, water poured into the hold, slowly, fatally, weighing the ship down. The Fitzgerald, already low in the water from the weight of the taconite, sank lower and lower until it lost buoyancy and plunged to the bottom. Investigators found that some of the hatch covers were missing or damaged, supporting this theory. Theory 2. The shoal. This theory, favored by the Lake Carriers Association and many sailors, argues that the Fitzgerald struck the bottom on 6 Fathom Shoal. The impact would have gashed the hull below the waterline, allowing water to ooze in. The ship, already damaged and taking on water, would have been no match for the storm. This theory is supported by the Anderson's radar data, which showed the Fitzgerald passing dangerously close to the shoal. Some experts believe the ship's keel may have scraped the rocks, causing hidden damage that led to progressive ooding. Theory 3. The Three Sisters. This is the rogue wave theory. Sailors on the Great Lakes speak of the Three Sisters, a phenomenon where 3 massive waves hit in rapid succession. The first wave crashes over the deck, adding weight. The second adds more. The third, striking before the ship can recover, is the firstnal blow, driving the bow under the water. The captain of the Anderson reported seeing 2 such waves hit his own ship just before the Fitzgerald disappeared. If the Fitzgerald was hit by the Three Sisters, it would explain the sudden, catastrophic sinking. For decades, the debate raged. Experts argued, families mourned, documentaries were made, books were written. But recent computer simulations, analysis of the wreck, and testimony from other sailors point to a terrifying conclusion. It was likely a combination of all 3 factors. The ship, already low in the water, and possibly damaged by a grounding on 6 Fathom Shoal, was taking on water through damaged or loose hatch covers. The pumps were working, but they couldn't keep up. The ship was sinking lower and lower, becoming more and more vulnerable to the waves. Then, the Three Sisters arrived. 3 massive waves, each one larger than the last, crashed over the deck. The first wave added tons of water. The second added more. The third, a towering wall of water estimated at 35 feet high, struck the bow with the force of a sledgehammer. The ship, already mortally wounded, was driven nose first into the wave. The immense stress on the hull caused it to snap in two. The bow plunged to the bottom. The stern, still buoyant for a few moments, ipped upside down and followed. It was over in seconds. The 29 men aboard never had a chance. They were likely thrown from their bunks, tossed against bulkheads, and drowned as the ship elled with water. Some may have been trapped in the engine room or the crew quarters. None of them made it to the lifeboats. None of them had time to send a distress call. They simply vanished with their ship. The sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald led to sweeping changes in Great Lakes shipping regulations. Mandatory survival suits for all crew members. New depth enders and positioning systems. Stricter inspection standards for hatch covers and hull integrity. Increased freeboard requirements to prevent swamping. But the mystery and the tragedy endures. The 29 men who went down with the Fitzgerald were never recovered. They remain with their ship, entombed in the cold, dark depths of Lake Superior. Their story, immortalized in Gordon Lightfoot's haunting ballad, serves as a reminder that even the mightiest of giants can be humbled by the power of nature. Thanks for watching. The legend of the Edmund Fitzgerald lives on. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, subscribe for more tales from the graveyards of the Great Lakes.